All right, buckle up, everybody, because we are about to go deep, deep down the rabbit hole.
Down the rabbit hole, indeed.
Listeners have been asking for a deep dive on DarkJournalist and his recent live streams. Well, they've been something else.
Definitely a lot to unpack.
Yeah, even for, seasoned conspiracy theory enthusiasts.
Absolutely.
So let's set the stage here.
Okay.
We're talking Illuminati, JFK, UFOs, even a little Edgar Cayce sprinkled in. And it all seems to be pointing towards, you guessed it, the 2024 election.
Yeah, it's quite a mix.
Yeah, we've got the research piled up here, articles, show notes, you name it,
Yeah.
ready to break down exactly how he's connecting all these dots.
It's fascinating, honestly. It's like he's pulling from all these different conspiracy theories, almost like he's creating a real life Dan Brown novel.
Right.
But then throws in, his own little twists and turns along the way.
Exactly. And it's not just like a random assortment of ideas either. It's like he's constructing a whole narrative, building this whole world where these shadowy elites are pulling the strings of global events, where advanced technology is being hidden from us, and figures like Lloyd Berkner and even institutions like MIT are major players in this grand scheme for power.
Yeah, and it's interesting how he uses real historical events and figures, but then kind of twists them to fit his narrative. Like, take the Illuminati, for example.
Right.
He makes it sound like they're this all-powerful, ever-present force, controlling everything from the shadows.
Yeah, like puppet masters, right?
Exactly.
Dictating everything from presidential elections to global pandemics. And he even goes as far as to say they were behind JFK's assassination.
Yeah, and that's where things get, well, a little shaky. Because the actual historical Illuminati were a Bavarian group back in the 18th century. They were all about Enlightenment ideals and really opposed to religious influence in society. And they actually disbanded pretty quickly, so it's not like they were orchestrating global conspiracies or anything. They were more focused on ideas and societal structures. But that name, Illuminati, it just has this air of mystery about it.
Right.
And conspiracy theorists have latched onto that, twisting it into something far more sinister and wide-reaching than it ever actually was.
So he's basically taken this obscure historical footnote and spun it into this grand shadowy cabal that's secretly controlling the world. And then to top it off, he links it to JFK's assassination, implying this Illuminati-like group was the mastermind behind it all.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so compelling for some people. It's this grand narrative that connects these seemingly disparate events.
Right.
And it really plays into people's fears about, powerful elites operating in the shadows.
Okay, so we've got this Illuminati-esque group potentially responsible for JFK's death. But then he takes it a step further, drawing this direct line from JFK to Trump. He claims there are these eerie parallels between their situations, especially when it comes to threats against them.
Yeah, and he really emphasizes these alleged attempts on Trump's life. It's this tactic he uses to create a sense of urgency, even fear.
Absolutely.
Look, they tried to silence JFK and now they're coming for Trump, and he's painting Trump as this lone wolf fighting against this entrenched hidden power structure, this so-called deep state. It's a classic us versus them narrative.
Okay, so we've got this narrative of shadowy elites, the deep state, coming after anyone who dares to challenge them. And that's where, as if things couldn't get any wilder, the UFOs enter the picture.
Right. Because why not?
It's exactly. DarkJournalist claims JFK wasn't just any president trying to rock the boat. He says JFK was assassinated because he was trying to uncover the truth about UFOs, that he was getting too close to this hidden UFO file, proof of extraterrestrial contact that the government's been keeping under wraps.
It's brilliant in a way, right? He's weaving together these classic conspiracy threads. You've got the Illuminati, the deep state, the JFK assassination, and now the granddaddy of them all, the UFO cover-up.
Right. It's like he's taken every conspiracy theory playbook and just thrown them all together.
It's like a conspiracy theory buffet, and he's piling his plate high.
And just when you think he's covered it all, he throws in, wait for it, Edgar Cayce.
Ah, yes, the sleeping prophet. You've got to give him credit for creativity, I'll say that.
Right. What's he doing with Edgar Cayce?
Well, he brings up Cayce's predictions about rising land masses and global shifts, a new age dawning. He's trying to add this almost apocalyptic element to his narrative, as if to say, look, this isn't just about politics anymore. This is about the fate of the world, the 2024 election. It's do or die, folks.
It's incredible, really. It's like he's created this grand cosmic battle, and Trump is right at the center, fighting against these ancient forces of darkness.
Exactly. And it's a narrative that really resonates with people who are already, inclined to believe in conspiracy theories
Right.
because it gives them this sense of having access to hidden knowledge. They're in the know while everyone else is just clueless.
So we've got a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
We've got this intricate web of conspiracies all leading to, well, we're not really sure yet, are we?
That's the question, isn't it? And that's where we really need to start digging deeper.
Okay, so where do we even begin with all of this? How do we start to unravel something this complex?
Well, I think to really understand what's going on here, we've got to look at how he's building this narrative.
Okay.
Like, what are the techniques he's using to draw people in and make these, pretty out there claims, make them seem even remotely credible?
So it's not just about what he's saying, it's about how he's saying it.
Exactly. It's like he's almost created his own language, his own way of interpreting events that, frankly, only make sense within the bubble of his own conspiracy theory.
So like, certain buzzwords or phrases that have a very specific meaning to his followers.
Right. Like he uses terms like executive action directive or continuity of government. And yeah, sure, those are real things.
Right.
But he uses them in this very specific way to imply something far more nefarious is going on.
Right. It's all about how he twists the meaning to fit his narrative.
Exactly. And then there's the way he cherry picks his evidence. He'll highlight some obscure historical detail or some supposed inconsistency that seems to support his point,
Right.
but conveniently ignores anything that contradicts it.
It's like he's creating his own version of reality, and if something doesn't fit, he just ignores it.
Precisely. Like, he talks about these alleged attempts on Trump's life.
Right.
And he brings up that incident with the guy, Crooks, who fired shots near a Trump rally.
Oh, yeah.
And he presents it as this clear-cut assassination attempt orchestrated by, you guessed it, the Depp state.
Right. And he even connects it back to JFK, saying both Oswald and Crooks were just patsies, manipulated by these shadowy figures.
Exactly. It's all part of this grand scheme, you see.
And he even brings up the fact that there's supposedly no picture of Crooks in his high school yearbook.
Which, is supposed to be evidence of a deeper conspiracy.
Right, like he's some fandom planted there just to take the fall.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, don't believe anything you see or hear, folks. The truth is out there, but they're hiding it from you.
And that's where the whole patsy thing comes into play, right?
Exactly. He's implying that these individuals, these so-called lone wolves, weren't acting alone at all. That they were either manipulated or even directly controlled by this all-powerful hidden hand that's pulling the strings from the shadows.
So basically, nothing is as it seems. Everyone's a puppet, and there's this grand puppeteer controlling everything from behind the scenes.
That's the narrative he's selling, and he uses fear to sell it. By constantly suggesting that Trump is in danger, that powerful forces want to silence him, he's creating this atmosphere of fear and paranoia that makes his claims seem even more believable, even urgent. It's classic fear-mongering.
Yeah, and it's not just Trump either. He brings RFK Jr. into it, too.
Oh, absolutely. He knows his audience, and he knows they're already primed to see RFK Jr. as a target.
Because of his stance on vaccines, because of his family history.
All of it. He taps into that existing distrust and fear and uses it to bolster his own narrative.
So how does he weave RFK Jr. into all of this?
Well, he uses the fact that RFK Jr. wasn't immediately given Secret Service protection, despite his family's history, as evidence that the deep state is out to get him.
Because they see him as a threat.
Exactly. They're threatened by his message, his lineage, everything. It's like he's trying to create this sense of, they got JFK and they'll get RFK Jr. if we don't stop them.
It's really quite a masterful manipulation of historical events and anxieties to create this grand narrative. It's almost like he's building a case brick by brick, and each one of these little details, these supposed inconsistencies, they're all just more evidence to support his claims.
And don't forget about the experts he brings on.
Oh, right. The guests on his show. It's like they're all singing from the same hymn sheet.
Exactly. He surrounds himself with people who already agree with him, which just reinforces his worldview and makes it seem even more credible to his followers. It creates this echo chamber where dissenting voices are drowned out.
It's almost cult-like, isn't it? The way he's created this closed loop of information and reinforcement.
That's a really apt comparison. He positions himself as this sort of guru figure, the holder of secret knowledge, And his followers, they're not just passively consuming this information, they're actively participating in it. They're sharing it, they're debating it, they're building on it. They're becoming part of something bigger than themselves.
And once you're sucked into that, once you've accepted that worldview,
Yeah,
it's hard to break free, isn't it?
exactly. Because to question Dark Journalist is to question everything you've come to believe, everything that gives you a sense of belonging, of purpose.
So what do we do? How do we reach people who are caught in these cycles of misinformation and fear?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't
It's
it?
almost as if he's crafted this like this self-contained world, you know?
Right, with its own set of rules, its own logic, and everything has to fit within those parameters.
Yeah.
Anything that doesn't fit, well, it's either ignored or explained away as part of the conspiracy.
So within that world, within that bubble, his claims kind of make sense.
Right, exactly.
But the minute you step outside that bubble, you start to see the cracks, the inconsistencies, the lack of any real evidence.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to take a step back, to not just accept everything at face value,
Right.
but to look at it critically, to question the source, the motives, the evidence, everything.
So if we're trying to understand Dark Journalist, I mean, what's the end game here? What's he hoping to achieve with all of this? What's his ultimate goal?
Well, if you ask me, it all comes down to power.
Power.
Yeah, power through fear. Because fear, it's a very powerful motivator.
Oh, yeah?
It can make people do irrational things, make them cling to simple answers in a world that's anything but.
Right. And Dark Journalist, he seems to really understand that. He knows how to tap into those fears, how to exploit them.
Exactly. He's a master manipulator,
Well.
He feeds his audience these half-truths, these outright fabrications, and he does it in a way that just confirms their worst fears. And the scariest
The
part,
serious part.
it works.
Yeah. And it's not just about making people afraid, right?
Yeah.
He's also offering them something, like a sense of belonging, a community.
Right, we're the ones who are in the know, we see the truth, everyone else is blind.
Right. Join us. And you too can be privy to these earth-shattering secrets.
Exactly. He's creating this us versus them mentality, this sense that his followers are the chosen few, the enlightened ones, while everyone else is either asleep or, even worse, part of the problem.
Yeah. And that's a dangerous path to go down, because once you start believing you're part of this this elite group that you have access to, this secret knowledge that nobody else does.
Right. It can be intoxicating. You start to feel special, important.
Right. And anyone who tries to tell you otherwise.
Right. They're just part of the conspiracy. They're trying to keep you down.
Exactly. It's this self-reinforcing cycle of misinformation and paranoia, and it just keeps feeding itself.
And breaking free from that, it's incredibly difficult because to question it is to question your whole reality, your whole sense of self.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the answer? How do we combat this kind of really insidious misinformation?
Well, there are no easy answers, that's for sure. But I think it starts with education, with critical thinking skills.
So teaching people how to evaluate information, how to spot fake news, how to recognize those really subtle manipulation tactics.
Exactly, because it's not always obvious, These days, misinformation can be so sophisticated, so cleverly disguised as legitimate news.
Right. It's not like the old days where you could just spot a grainy photo or a typo and be like, okay, this is fake.
Exactly. Now it's like they're weaponizing the truth,
Yeah.
They'll take a kernel of truth and twist it, distort it until it fits their narrative. And they do it all with this air of authority, of credibility that makes it even more believable.
Yeah, it's scary stuff. So teaching people those critical thinking skills, that's crucial.
Absolutely. And, it's not just about spotting the lies. It's
Yeah.
also about being open to different perspectives, even ones we might not agree with.
So being willing to listen to the other side, to consider alternative viewpoints, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
Exactly, because none of us are immune to this, We all have our biases or preconceived notions, and it's easy to fall into those echo chambers, to just surround ourselves with people who agree with us, who reinforce our existing beliefs.
Right. But that's not how you grow.
Exactly. Growth comes from challenging our assumptions, from being open to new information, even if it means having to re-examine our own beliefs.
So what you're saying is it's a two-pronged approach, right?
Yeah.
We need to equip people with the tools to critically evaluate information.
Yes.
And then we need to encourage them to use those tools to engage in respectful, open-minded dialogue.
Exactly. It's about fostering a culture of curiosity, of skepticism, and most importantly, of empathy.
Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together.
Yeah, absolutely. We may not always agree, but we have to be willing to listen to each other, to try to understand where the other person is coming from.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. It's been, well, enlightening, to say the least.
To say the least, it's like we've taken a crash course in the dark side of information warfare.
Right. We've seen how easily misinformation can spread, how quickly it can take root in people's minds, and how difficult it can be to counter.
Exactly. But awareness is the first step, isn't it?
Absolutely. By understanding the tactics, the techniques, the motivations behind this kind of really sophisticated misinformation, we can start to build those defenses, both for ourselves and for our communities.
Exactly. It's about empowering ourselves with knowledge, with critical thinking skills, and with that healthy dose of skepticism.
So that we can all be more informed, more discerning, and ultimately more responsible citizens in this, frankly, kind of crazy information age.
Well said. Couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder all of that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Dark Journalist. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep those thinking caps on, everybody.